on Life and Times.
Thank you for seeing me.
Courting power and influence.
Very quickly, he was at the center, the political center of Canada.
I'm going to reach out to him.
Maurice Strong's crusade to save the planet.
I found that people were turned on about the idea that our Earth was in danger.
Hi and welcome. I'm Anne-Marie MacDonald. Can a rich oilman be a radical environmentalist? Maurice Strong is a major force behind the Kyoto Accord. He has mentored world leaders. His little black book is a catalog of the rich and powerful, from the World Bank to the United Nations. Accused by critics on the right of being a Marxist and by those on the left of being another fat cat, Maurice Strong refuses to be pigeonholed. His dual ambitions of wealth and social justice were forged in the Great Depression, and he rose from the Manitoba Dust Bowl to become the ultimate insider. An international wise man with a genius for making connections. Can Maurice Strong save us from ourselves? He's trying.
A state visit in the Grand Ballroom of the Kremlin. The President of Russia and his wife are welcoming the Governor General of Canada and her husband. Protocol requires Vladimir Putin to greet each member of the delegation personally.
President's a great privilege, pleasure.
But who is that man getting so much of the President's attention? He is Maurice Strong, a man so understated he attracts little attention in his own country, yet he may be the most influential Canadian on the planet. He is a diplomat, businessman, super civil servant who has been awarded more than 50 honorary degrees, though his formal education ended with only a high school diploma.
Thanks very much. See you later. Okay, yep.
Strong was born in a small town in rural Manitoba, but today he frequents all of the world's great capitals. The rich and powerful are his friends and admirers.
I've known Maurice for, I guess, over 15 years, and he's a really straight thinker.
For me, it was wonderful to have someone whom I could trust and who knew my background, and who knew the limitations of my capacities and also maybe some of the possibilities.
These are times that call for men like Maurice Strong.
It's very exciting to be, with somebody like that who's always doing something different. It's amazing kind of person.
He is a visionary, but not a dreamer. Maurice may come across to others as said, too many ideas, man, but there are some gems in those ideas. If you take time to sit with him or sift through it, you'll get some great ones.
The world's #1 environmental leader, presented by Lawrence Rockefeller.
He is the Michelangelo of networking, Father Earth, a citizen of the world. Many have attempted to define Maurice Strong. Some see him as a cross between Machiavelli and Rasputin.
Maurice Strong, like Atlas, holding the world in his hand.
Certainly, at 75 years of age, and after pitching his tent in the four corners of the world, he has the ear of the powerful.
Well, a whole generation of children is experiencing this malnutrition. Even those who survive are in real danger.
8 times Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, president of 2 world summits on the environment in Stockholm and Rio. Kofi Annan's special envoy to North Korea.
If this situation escalates, it could, in fact, get out of hand.
Maurice Strong today is a power behind the throne of the new Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin.
There's no doubt that in the areas where Maurice Strong is a world leader, I'm going to reach out to him.
What is it about Maurice Strong that has charmed so many powerful people? Drive. Since he was young, Strong has been driven by a sense of urgency and concern.
We are now a species out of control.
His mission for the last half-century has been to prevent the destruction of the world and to save man from himself.
Human beings have acquired immense power.
Beautiful, just beautiful.
Unprecedented power. Power to do good, yes, as we have seen, that there have been many good things come out of our progress, and at the same time an unprecedented power for destruction.
His plan is to prevent catastrophe through dialogue. In the world, according to Strong, North and South, East and West, rich and poor must talk to each other.
I had been very influenced by the Depression, growing up in the Depression.
Maurice Strong is born in 1929, the year the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. He grows up in Oak Lake, Manitoba, the eldest of 4 children. They live in extreme poverty.
My father had no steady job. He had to work very hard just to produce a bare subsistence living for us. One of my most vivid memories is freight trains going both ways, loaded with people. People sitting on the boxcars up on the top, and when the train stopped, they would come across to our house and to other houses that were wanting water, wanting food. And I remember thinking, what is wrong with the system? And maybe I could do something about it, you know?
Never being poor. I remember them saying that. He'll never be poor, right? Whatever he does, you know, because he saw the restrictions of being poor, and he realized that in order to do the things he wanted, he had to get some financial security, and he did.
At school in Oak Lake, young Maurice meets a man who becomes a major influence in his life. Principal Clarence Heapy is political, a left-winger, a supporter of the CCF, the forerunner of the NDP. He teaches his frustrated young student to think within a political framework.
He and my mother introduced me to the larger world, the world of literature, the world of other thinkers, you know.
Strong's mother, a cultivated and sensitive woman, suffers from chronic depression and is often in hospital. Her illness gives Maurice a sense of responsibility beyond his years.
How close was Maurice to his mother?
Extremely. Extremely. She once said to him, "Never stop learning, and you'll get to the top."
He makes his fortune in the Alberta oil and gas boom. By his mid-20s, he's a millionaire. He wants to be rich and independent, but also wants to champion social justice. To his parents' dismay, he drops out of school at 14. To earn a living, he works as a deckhand on ships. Eventually, he comes back to Oak Lake to finish high school, but now he has a dream.
And I read a newspaper that was sort of blowing in the wind, and it talked about Churchill and Roosevelt meeting in the Atlantic and deciding that after the war there would be a great new United Nations organization to ensure that the world would never again have to experience the tragedy of war. And I fixed on that and said, that's what I want to do eventually.
Strong gets his first real job at age 16. Driven by a sense of adventure and taste for travel, he goes north as a buyer of furs for the Hudson's Bay Company. Here, he makes a crucial connection. Bill Richardson is a prospector and a bit of an adventurer. Through his wife, Mary McCall, he's well connected in both the Toronto establishment and abroad. The Richardsons are charmed by the clever and ambitious young man. They introduce Strong to people who have connections at the UN.
I learned very early, though, I could never get any job by applying to the personnel department, because when they look at my resume, they will never be impressed. So I always was fortunate to get my jobs because somebody met me and was good enough to offer me opportunity.
Strong gets a job as a clerk at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. Heady times for a boy of 17. Maurice Strong has an extraordinary capacity to make the most of his luck. After only a few months in New York, he meets David Rockefeller, the financial guru of the UN, son of John D. Rockefeller, who's made construction of the famous UN building possible. It's the beginning of a long friendship and a network of contacts and influence which today extends around the world. But Strong realizes that without a university degree or a personal fortune, he has no hope of rapidly climbing the ladder at the UN.
So I made a decision which was, okay, if I cannot get into the foreign aid business, if I cannot get into the business of helping humanity directly, perhaps I can do it indirectly if I go into business and I use business as a platform.
The plan works. Strong becomes a boy wonder in the world of business. In his early 20s, he gets a job at Dome Mines in Calgary. He's an excellent manager. He distinguishes himself for his innovative thinking and remarkable self-discipline. By age 25, he's the president. In 1950, he marries Pauline Williams, a student he met in Winnipeg. They will have 4 children. By the end of the 50s, his reputation and contacts lead him to Montreal. 2 years later, at 31, he becomes president of Power Corporation, a breeding ground for Canada's business and political elite.
Power Corp became a kind of foundation for political people who needed to practice in public, in small, organized fora. And very important politicians came through that system, up to and including Pierre Trudeau. And so very quickly, he was at the center, the political center of Canada.
Strong wins his spurs with the Liberal Party establishment. And once again, he makes powerful friends. Later, they will name him head of the External Aid Office of Canada, now CEDA. At the same time, Strong begins to build his own network of protégés, young men just graduated from major universities who dream of changing the world. He has an uncanny flair for discovering future leaders. Among them is a young lawyer, Paul Martin Jr.
I was a student and I got a job working for an oil and gas company that Maurice Strong was the president of in Western Canada. I went down to check the Calgary Stampede on a weekend with my truck, which I wasn't supposed to do. On the way back, I rolled the truck, had an accident. Maurice Strong found out about it and fired me. Fortunately, about 5 or 6 years later, he rehired me in a different job.
It's at Power Corporation that Strong gives young Paul Martin his first real job. To run the Australian division, he also hires Jim Wolfenson, today president of the World Bank.
Those early days in Power Corporation forged very strong friendships. These are not contracts. This is something that you feel in your heart. And there are a few people like that where when you're young you build the relationships and they just last. And Maurice is one of those relationships.
In a reversal of roles, Wolfenson later hires Strong as an advisor at the World Bank.
It's a great morning, eh? That's a beautiful morning.
Early morning in Red Square, Moscow. Another former protégé is keeping Strong company on his morning walk. His Excellency John Ralston Saul, the writer, philosopher, and husband of the Governor-General of Canada. 30 years ago, when Pierre Trudeau appointed Strong to start Petro-Canada, Strong hired John Saul.
Well, thank you for seeing me.
For Maurice Strong, there is no such thing as a visit to Moscow without dropping in on Mikhail Gorbachev.
What a wonderful portrait.
Once ruler of the Soviet Union, he now runs his foundation, and he's great pals with Maurice Strong. They met 10 years ago through their concern for the environment.
Well, I am older than you, I believe.
Now they are both sponsors of the Earth Charter, a document inspired by the UN Charter of Human Rights, which promotes a world of justice, peace, and sustainable development.
We used Maurice Strong a lot. It was very important to us to collaborate with this man.
Before they part, Gorbachev gives his friend Strong a gift, a glass saber, full of the same brandy that Stalin used to send Winston Churchill every week.
And it will be a very precious thing in my own memories, especially because...
But as Strong found out, it's not easy being both a businessman and an environmental activist. How does a businessman who exploits natural resources suddenly become a custodian of the environment? The turning point was a case of sheer chance. In 1970, while Strong was head of CIDA, the Secretary General of the UN was looking for someone who could influence developing countries.
He asked Trudeau to release Maurice from his job as the president of CIDA to become the Secretary General of the world's first environment conference, because Maurice was a friend of developing countries and he knew them.
I declare open the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment.
For me, it represented the fulfillment of ambition I had had from before the United Nations was even started.
Will you please welcome the Secretary General of the conference, Maurice Strong.
At Stockholm, Strong makes a bold move, a first for a UN conference. He brings pressure groups and non-government organizations into the debate with governments. It's the start of a global dialogue.
And governments will do about as much about these problems as they feel that people like you are going to require them to do.
I found that people were turned on about the idea that our Earth was in danger, and that our own life depends on the Earth and having a hospitable environment. And so how to translate that into a kind of political energy that would move the governments to do the right things in Stockholm, to take the right decisions.
You have to remember that at the Stockholm conference, where I went to be with Maurice, that was a breakthrough. We now talk about environment, and there are environmental groups everywhere. But Maurice was the first to pull all this together.
20 years later, there is another UN conference on the environment, this time in Rio de Janeiro. Amazingly, the same man, Maurice Strong, is Secretary General again.
We have been running Earth Incorporated in a very unbusinesslike way.
It's an unparalleled success. 108 heads of state and government meet in the Brazilian metropolis. The spirit of the Rio Earth Summit is captured in this remarkable photo where President Bush poses with arch-enemy Fidel Castro. Also on the agenda, the Convention on Biodiversity and the Convention on Climate Change, predecessors of the Kyoto Accord. Countries that are complete opposites politically come together to sign these groundbreaking agreements.
Without Rio, we would have made far less progress. But even with Rio, we have made less progress than we need.
Maurice Strong may sometimes be a guest at palaces, but most often he lives out of a suitcase in anonymous hotel rooms. He's like an international traveling salesman, with lists of contacts and notes on loose papers kept carefully in his pocket. This evening, he's going back to the Kremlin for a state dinner with Vladimir Putin.
Hello, Mrs. Strong. I guess you're in time. I have a list of other people to talk to, his assistants.
You have it?
Yes,
here?
I have it.
Did you show it to me?
Oh, yes. Advisor to the President, Sergei Perkovo. These are people I pinned down there. See. Is this the right car?
Strong has uncommon energy. He's a workhorse and passionate. He throws himself into his UN missions, from organizing aid in famine-ridden Africa in the 80s to reforming the United Nations itself in 1997.
I haven't come across anybody like Maurice. For him, you can't tell him this is impossible or a problem. He will say, let me think about it.
It comes as no surprise when in January 2003, Kofi Annan gives Strong a new mandate, a humanitarian mission to North Korea. Strong has carte blanche to help with the famine and try to ease political tension. Strong pulls an original idea out of his hat. It's classic Strong, a humanitarian problem and an economic solution. A pipeline for peace will transport natural gas from Irkutsk and Sakhalin in Russia to North and South Korea. The hope is that it will supply enough energy for the Kim Jong-il regime to drop its nuclear plans.
It is something that, if it can be realized, will make an important difference.
He doesn't know how to use a computer, but his faithful secretary does. And even though she is thousands of kilometers away, their system works.
He sends things to me, I send things back, so it's almost like he doesn't have to be here. He can be anywhere.
There's a place called Yamal, which is in northern...
He's everywhere. He talks up the Korean pipeline project with Russian businessmen. And later, at an environmental conference.
There will not be a settlement of the nuclear issue without it. Great.
The Governor General's trip is under fire at home, but Maurice Strong may make it pay off.
I have a direct line now to President Putin on these issues.
Yeah.
At first they thought I was suggesting that they give the gas away.
Yes, yes. So that was very clear.
That was so clear in the meeting yesterday. You know, like, so what is the meaning of this?
But I did get that point across. That look, in fact, you'll make money at it.
Strong's ingenuity continues to delight his friends.
You know, the cliche today is you think outside the box. And I can actually sort of see Maurice's mind working. I've known him now long enough. I can see him kind of displacing himself out of all the structured arguments and then coming in behind them with a completely fresh approach.
If I think out of the box, it's just because I've never had the privilege of being in the box.
Aren't you scared sometimes that he's thinking a little bit too much out of the box?
I'm not scared by that. We're operating in a very difficult world. It's a really messy world, and some of the issues that you're dealing with, you need to be creative, you need to be able to think out of the box.
However, his unconventional methods do worry some observers. Author Elaine Dewar investigated environmental NGOs at the Rio summit.
He had organized them, he had paid for them, he had invented them, he had his friends running them. These organizations were able to put ideas into the public sphere as if they were coming from the ground up, when in fact they were coming from the top down.
The idea that Maurice actually went out and organized a bunch of NGOs from the ground up is rubbish. Maurice has been involved with NGOs for years, but the idea that he created all of them is silly. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of civil society organizations.
Are you prepared to pink slip thousands of employees?
I am prepared to do what has to be done to make this corporation viable and competitive.
He gets into a lot of hot water when he becomes head of Ontario Hydro. Strong is called in by his friend Premier Bob Rae just after Rio. For Rae, only Strong, with his unconventional thinking, will be able to get the huge Crown Corporation out of its mess. He restructures the electricity giant, which was collapsing under debt. 10,000 layoffs later, the union is furious.
What Maurice Strong is doing to the morale across Ontario Hydro, he's killing it. He's destroying it.
I was criticized by two things. The union people, understandably, for people losing their jobs, but at the same time, I was criticized by the right-wing newspapers that I paid them too much.
Today, the union leader who confronted Strong heads one of the utilities divisions, and he's now implementing Strong's business methods. But if his critics on the left are muted, those on the right are not.
There's a large school of thought in the American right that think that he's part of some sort of global conspiracy. This global conspiracy of international do-gooders and world federalists and sneaky NGOs who are basically plotting the downfall of U.S. influence in the world.
It's not just the American right. Strong has enemies in Canada too, notably in the West. Many hold a grudge against Petro-Canada and deeply resent the Kyoto Accord. Peter Foster, a columnist for the National Post, has made Strong a favorite target.
He believes apocalypse is just around the corner unless we have some sort of centrally
organized control of global issues.
Maurice Strong doesn't have any ambition for the United Nations to become the world government.
No, and it's not necessary, it's not feasible, and certainly we're a long way from any such thing. But we do need, if we're going to have a more peaceful world, a more secure world, we need a more effective system of cooperation, which is what I call system of governance. And the United Nations, with all its difficulties, is the best game in town.
While in Russia, Strong is given a rare opportunity to visit a former Soviet work camp in Siberia, the remnants of a regime some critics have accused him of admiring. Foster is one of them.
He might have adopted some of Lenin's strategies in his time. He does fundamentally, in many ways, have a sort of, pseudo-Marxist view of the world.
In the sense of sharing many of the objectives of socialism, yes. In terms of sharing the methods used by old-line socialists, simply having government control everything, that doesn't work, and I don't believe in that. Socialists and communists are not going to defeat capitalism. What will defeat capitalism, and I hope it doesn't, are the irresponsible, greedy, indulgent capitalists who simply cannot be satisfied no matter how much money they make.
Yet Strong himself has been branded an unscrupulous capitalist. By the 70s, he's been divorced and remarried. With his second wife, Hannah, he buys a ranch in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. Today, she still runs the Manitou Foundation there, a spiritual community which welcomes all religions. But the prophet of environmental protection soon finds himself in a conflict of interest. The ranch sits on one of the largest American aquifers. Strong, the businessman, can't pass it up. He finds partners and they start a project to pump the water. His wife opposes the plan.
He did start it with good intentions that the water would be used in the valley, but he got the wrong partners. He got partners that were so greedy. And when they found out that there was trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of water underneath, they went crazy. I mean, he became a very hated person in that valley.
Under Colorado law, underground water doesn't belong to the owner of the land above it. To prevent others from getting control of the aquifer, Strong wants to develop it locally. But his partners are thinking bigger. Denver and other cities are potential clients. The project runs into fierce opposition. The debate rages for years until the Supreme Court of Colorado finally denies a permit to pump the water. Strong splits with his partners. He had planned to become an American citizen, but he gives that up. He focuses his attention back on Canada.
I will not apologize to anyone for getting in there and trying to make sure that an important resource is developed sustainably.
I don't believe, an environmentalist should be in a resource business.
It's precisely in putting environmentalists in positions where they can help to control resource development that you actually show your environmental credentials. I have never believed that you should simply just be pontificating and speaking all the time and be unwilling to be a practitioner.
Through it all, the couple weathers the storm.
Well, it took me a while to get over it. It did take me a while. And lucky I'm a Buddhist. Thinking is over here.
A decorator by profession, Hannah Strong has lost count of the number of apartments and houses she's set up during her husband's career.
Geneva, London, Costa Rica, and then all over Canada, New York, Colorado, Phoenix, Arizona.
The Strongs bought this Ottawa apartment in November 2003. This won't be any more permanent than the 5 other places they own around the world. But for now, it fits the game plan.
And we're not far from Parliament. If they need any help there from, which they probably will not.
For Prime Minister Paul Martin, Strong heads the list of friends who count. A great friend of Paul Martin Sr., Strong is practically a member of the family.
Maurice va choisir là où il veut faire sa marque. Moi, je n'hésiterai jamais à lui demander conseil.
Although only 8 years separate them, Strong is a kind of father figure to the Prime Minister. It was Strong who urged Martin to achieve financial independence before going into politics.
Stay in business long enough to build up essentially the financial underpinning so that when you go into public life, if that's what you decide to do, that you're not beholden to anybody, so that you can speak your mind without regard for other influences. And that was a very, very important piece of advice that he gave me, and it's one that I followed.
It was also Strong who encouraged Martin to buy Canada Steamship Lines.
It was a big risk, and one of the things that I learned from Maurice Strong was that you don't succeed unless you're prepared to take big risks. And this was a big risk, but I must say that the fact that he was there and that he was encouraging was very helpful.
So it's understandable that the day the Liberal Party chooses Paul Martin as its leader is an emotional moment for Strong, too.
That was one of those moments when I look back to my earlier days with him and with his father and realized what a moment that was for all of us.
His father would be proud of him.
No question.
It's emotional for you talking about that. Why?
Well, I guess everybody has an emotional side. And these things are very important parts of my life.
Some other of your friends didn't do as well as Paul Martin. I'm thinking about Al Gore.
Actually, I talked to him last night. That's right, he won the election and lost the presidency.
He was standing for issues which are very important for you, like environment, that's much right. More than the present administration.
Well, that's right. And in that sense, of course, I'm disappointed in that. And I would like to see President Bush give the same attention to some of these issues, which are as much of a threat to the security of America and the world as the immediate threats posed by terrorism, for example.
Unlike the U.S., Canada has ratified the Kyoto Accord, but implementing it is far from a done deal.
And I'm going to do everything I can to help our Prime Minister make Canada an example of how to meet their responsibilities and at the same time create a benefit.
Beyond the environment, Maurice Strong worries about Canada's place in the world, an area where he may well influence the Prime Minister.
We have a lot of credibility, but that is not sufficient. We have to keep earning our distinctive role.
Some think there's even a risk that Maurice Strong could become a sort of Rasputin, manipulating the Prime Minister to his own ends.
He loves to have influence. He loves to be involved, but you need to trust the leader. I would doubt that Kofi Annan did things that he didn't want to do because of Maurice Strong. I would be very surprised if Paul Martin would do anything that he didn't want to do because of Maurice Strong. I can assure you I didn't do anything that I didn't want to do because of Maurice Strong. But what you want to have is the benefit of his advice.
I'm not hearing you very well. I'm right in the midst of a big crowd of people.
As far as I'm concerned, I really only have one complaint about Maurice Strong, and that is that I wish he understood that when it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon in China, it is 3 o'clock in the morning in Canada, and that's when he always decides to call.
How much he asked for?
$1,200.
It should be even lower.
I give him, okay, 600.
These days, Strong spends a lot of his time in Asia. Whether he's wearing his diplomat or businessman's hat, he's made Beijing his base of operations.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. See. I have a deep sense of the importance of China and the importance of friends of China.
Here, too, he owns an apartment. He's been coming to China for almost 50 years. The trip to China follows the Strong formula. He's come this time mainly as a diplomat on his way to North Korea. He spent a week waiting for a meeting with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs because China is a major player in the North Korea file. But as Strong never wastes time, he's out doing business and networking. His days start early. He works out of an office at a multinational company specializing in environmental technology. Before everyone else, he foresaw China's economic boom. He's invested a lot of time and effort here in China. Strong may have been an early friend of China, but the relationship was severely tested after the massacre in Tiananmen Square. The Rio summit was coming up, and Strong intervened personally to convince China to attend, even though China was being shunned by the rest of the world. It's a key element of the Strong approach.
All of us who are working in our own way to make a better world, a more peaceful world, have got to learn to keep the lines of communication with each other open, even in the most difficult circumstances. Maybe you could say, especially when the circumstances are most difficult.
After a week, the meeting at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs finally takes place.
Okay. Thank you.
What went on? That's top secret.
Very good meeting. So now, and we're using that line. So I'm putting together a task force of...
He never stops. Even on Christmas Eve, one of the few times he's with his family, he's busy working the phones. This time it's Robert Cart, the American Undersecretary of State for Energy. They're discussing Strong's pet project, the Korean pipeline.
Perhaps creating an economic link between the two Koreas, which can help to keep the peace.
It's always surprising to us, when you might get a phone call from whoever it might be, head of state or, a secretary general or whoever from whatever walk of life, and frankly, mostly from outside of Canada, political leaders and business leaders, just seeking his counsel. So
Constantly.
Between phone calls, he rejoins the party.
Well, gee, you shouldn't do that.
Yes, we should. Do you want to sit down, Granddad?
I'm too excited to sit down.
He speaks to the grandkids, at least once a week. We get messages from, just Granddad calling in from Ouagadougou or from Siberia or from Cape Town or wherever it happens to be.
He's a father and a grandfather, Undersecretary General of the UN, a civil servant and businessman, a friend of and confidant to the powerful, a true insider.
And so my dad used to get up on Christmas morning and he would light a fire.
When people ask me as a child, what does your father do? I never knew quite what to answer, and I still don't.
How come?
Well, because he does so much, and he's always doing about 10 times more things than your average person. And he continues to do that even though he's long past retirement age.
Now 75, Maurice Strong travels the planet he loves tirelessly. He has diabetes, and he had a triple heart bypass just 3 years ago. Still, he runs to beat the clock. It's as though he lives in his own private time zone.
Before the heart operation, he slowed down a little bit, not much. And after the heart operation, he's now trying to save the planet 10 times as fast as he was before.
And I see some of my friends retiring, talking about their golf game and this kind of thing. Well, that's good for them, but it's not particularly exciting for me.
I always tell people, when he's up there flying all around the world, he's charging up on this cosmic energy.
He's been chasing his dreams for 60 years, but he's a realist who understands the limits of what one person can accomplish.
Okay. Where's my car?
Even if that person is Maurice Strong.
Most of the things I've been working on, environment, relief of poverty, justice, equity, a better, more equitable, peaceful world, all of those things have not been achieved. So you could say that everything I've done has so far been a failure. But a failure in the sense that these are big movements, big historical movements, and no one person can just do it. So I look at my role as a very modest little role, just where can I put my weight and can I help move the process a little bit. That's all anybody can ask.
The globe-trotting Maurice Strong considers a wooden house on Lost Lake in northern Ontario his true home. He spends as much time there as possible when he's not in Beijing, Tokyo, or New York. I'm Anne-Marie MacDonald. Thanks for watching. Here's a preview of the next.
Times Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, President of 2 World Summits on the Environment in Stockholm and Rio. Kofi Annan's Special Envoy to North Korea.
If this situation escalates, it could, in fact, get out of hand.
Maurice Strong today is a power behind the throne of the new Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin.
There's no doubt that in the areas where Maurice Strong is a world leader, I'm going to reach out to.
What is it about Maurice Strong that has charmed so many powerful people? Drive. Since he was young, Strong has been driven by a sense of urgency and concern.
We are now a species out of control.
His mission for the last half-century has been to prevent the destruction of the world and to save man from himself.
Human beings have acquired immense power. Unprecedented power. Power to do good, yes, as we have seen, that there have been many good things come out of progress, and at the same time an unprecedented power for destruction.
His plan is to prevent catastrophe through dialogue. In the world, according to Strong, North and South, East and West, rich and poor must talk to each other.
I had been very influenced by the Depression, growing up in the Depression.
Maurice Strong is born in 1929, the year the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. He grows up in Oak Lake, Manitoba, the eldest of 4 children. They live in extreme poverty.
My father had no steady job. He had to work very hard just to produce a bare subsistence living for us. One of my most vivid memories is freight trains going both ways, loaded with people. People sitting on the boxcars up on the top, and when the train stopped, they would come across to our house and to other houses that were wanting water, wanting food. And I remember thinking, what is wrong with the system? And maybe I could do something about it, you know?
Never being poor. I remember them saying that. He'd never be poor, right? Whatever he does, you know, because he saw the restrictions of being poor, and he realized that in order to do the things he wanted, he had to get some financial security, and he did.
At school in Oak Lake, young Maurice meets a man who becomes a major influence in his life. Principal Clarence Heapy is political, a left-winger.
On Life and Times.
Thank you for seeing me.
Courting power and influence.
Very quickly, he was at the center, the political center of Canada.
I'm going to reach out to him.
Maurice Strong's crusade to save the planet.
I found that people were turned on about the idea that our Earth was in danger.
and welcome. I'm Anne-Marie MacDonald. Can a rich oilman be a radical environmentalist? Maurice Strong is a major force behind the Kyoto Accord. He has mentored world leaders. His little black book is a catalog of the rich and powerful, from the World Bank to the United Nations. Accused by critics on the right of being a Marxist and by those on the left of being another fat cat, Maurice Strong refuses to be pigeonholed. His dual ambitions of wealth and social justice were forged in the Great Depression, and he rose from the Manitoba Dust Bowl to become the ultimate insider. An international wise man with a genius for making connections. Can Maurice Strong save us from ourselves?
For me, it was wonderful to have someone whom I could trust and who knew my background and who knew the limitations of my capacities and also maybe some of the possibilities.
These are times that call for men like Maurice Strong.
It's very exciting to be, with somebody like that who's always doing something different. It's amazing kind of person.
He is a visionary, but not a dreamer. Maurice may come across to others as said, too many ideas, man, but there are some gems in those ideas. If you take time to sit with him or sift through it, you'll get some great ones.
The world's #1 environmental leader, presented by Lawrence Rockefeller.
He is the Michelangelo of networking, Father Earth, a citizen of the world. Many have attempted to define Maurice Strong. Some see him as a cross between Machiavelli and Rasputin.
Maurice Strong, like Atlas, holding the world in his hand.
Certainly, at 75 years of age, and after pitching his tent in the four corners of the world, he has the ear of the powerful.
Well, a whole generation of children is experiencing this malnutrition. Even those who survive are in real danger.
He's trying.
A state visit in the Grand Ballroom of the Kremlin. The President of Russia and his wife are welcoming the Governor General of Canada and her husband. Protocol requires Vladimir Putin to greet each member of the delegation personally.
President's great privilege, pleasure.
But who is that man getting so much of the President's attention? He is Maurice Strong, a man so understated he attracts little attention in his own country, yet he may be the most influential Canadian on the planet. He is a diplomat, businessman, super civil servant who has been awarded more than 50 honorary degrees, though his formal education ended with only a high school diploma.
Thanks very much. See you later. Okay, yep.
Strong was born in a small town in rural Manitoba, but today he frequents all of the world's great capitals. The rich and powerful are his friends and admirers.
I've known Maurice for, I guess, over 15 years, and he's a really straight thinker.